Welcome to Lesson 1 of Module 4 on Basic Query Formulation with SQL. I'm going to start with two questions for you, one a trivia question and the other an important question about the impact of standards commercially. Why is SQL sometimes pronounced SQL? How does compliance with the SQL standard compare to compliance with web standards such as the HTML5, the markup language for web documents? Module 4 builds on the skills and knowledge in Module 3. Module 3 emphasized concrete skills and knowledge about the relational data model using the create table statement and understanding the tables and relationships in existing databases. These skills are essential for developing query formulation skills that are emphasized in Modules 4 and 5. This lesson provides your initial background about query formulation, so the learning objectives are modest. I want you to briefly explain three types of statements in SQL. As a more conceptual objective, I want you to reflect about the level of conformance to the SQL standard among DBMS vendors, especially the issues of portability versus vendor control and innovation. The structured query language, SQL, has evolved over 40 years as a language containing statements for database definition, control, and manipulation. In Module 3, you use the create table statement. Modules 4 and 5 emphasize the select statement for data manipulation, the most important statement in SQL. The structured query language has a colorful history. SQL began life as the Square language in IBM's System R project. The Square language was somewhat mathematical in nature. After conducting human factors experiments, the IBM research team revised the language and renamed it SQL, a follow-up to Square, and then renamed it SQL 2. Its current name, SQL, resulted from legal issues surrounding the name SQL. Because of this naming history, a number of database professionals, particularly those working during the 1970s, pronounce the name as SQL rather than SQL. With the force of IBM behind SQL, many imitators use some variant of SQL. It may seem surprising, but IBM was not the first company to commercialize SQL. Until a standards effort developed in the 1980s, SQL was in a state of commercial confusion with many variants implemented. The standards efforts by the American National Standards Institute, the International Organization for Standards, and the International Electrotechnical Commission have restored some order. Although SQL was not initially the best database language developed, the standards efforts have improved the language as well as standardized its specification. SQL can be used in two contexts, standalone and embedded. In the standalone context, the user submits SQL statements with the use of a specialized editor such as the SQL developer. In the embedded context, an executing program submits SQL statements, and the DBMS sends results back to the program. The program includes SQL statements along with statements of the host programming language such as Java or Visual Basic. SQL was designed as a complete data language, covering database definition, manipulation, and control. Definition statements create objects such as tables. Manipulation statements retrieve or change rows. Control statements ensure proper usage of a database, such as row integrity and security. Database administrators typically use most of the database definition and control statements. You have already used the create table statement in Module 3. Module 4 covers basic aspects of the select statement. Module 5 covers extensions to the select statement, as well as the insert, update, and delete statements. The weakness of the SQL standards is the lack of conformance testing. Until 1996, the U.S. Department of Commerce's National Institute of Standards and Technology conducted conformance tests to provide assurance that government software can be ported among conforming DBMSs. Since 1996, however, DBMS vendor claims have substituted for independent conformance testing. Even for core SQL, the major vendors lack support for some features and provide proprietary support for other features. With the optional parts, conformance has much greater variance. Writing portable SQL code requires careful study for core SQL, but is not possible for optional parts of SQL. In comparison, compliance of web standards such as HTML5 is strong. HTML5 is the markup language for web pages. The World Wide Web Consortium, the major governing body of the web, has a validation service. There is also a web standards project with a variety of standard compliance test pages called ACID3. Let's wrap up this lesson giving you an initial background on the SQL standard. SQL is a broad language with many statements, but weak conformance among DBMS vendors. Weak conformance means reduced portability across DBMSs and higher switching costs. The DBMS industry has more vendor-powered compared to the web environment. The DBMS industry may argue that weak conformance allows more vendor innovation at a modest cost of somewhat higher switching costs. Modules 4 and 5 will cover details of the select statement and the query formulation process. You will need lots of practice to master query formulation and the select statement.